For those of you who have been unable to attend a Chromosome 18 Registry conference, such as the one in Chicago last year, we've been providing a handout of information to families to give them help with a research update. We found that at this point in time we have so much information we can't possibly just present it in a talk. We'd be talking all day long. So those things that are best presented just on a piece of paper so you can read the information in tables and lists, that information we've been providing in a handout. And so if you want to copy the handout, you can get it from Anna. So I'll show you her email on the last slide. But some of this does take some explanation, so I thought I'd go over some of it and give it a little context for you as we go through this. So this particular one is 18q minus. So on the first page here, and hopefully you'll have a handout so you can follow along. The first page shows an image of the chromosomes of people with 18q minus. And one of the things that we've learned is no two people with 18q minus have exactly the same deletion. This creates a really big challenge when you're trying to create a syndrome description, because it really isn't a syndrome. There's not a unified chromosome abnormality here. It's really a collection of chromosome abnormalities. So in order to try to make sense of it and convey some information, at least within groups within the 18q minus community, we have been able to separate it into different groups. So let me go over that here in this image. And if you've been to a conference or seen any of our other webinars, you've seen images like this before. So let me take a minute to explain. At the top, going across the top, is an ideogram of chromosome 18. So here's the centromere right here. So this is the P arm and this is the Q arm. So I'll show these types of images often and you'll see a red box around some portion of the chromosome. In this case, the red box is around the whole chromosome. And that means the image below is a whole chromosome image. So every one of these blue bars, and you can hardly tell they're blue bars here, but every blue bar shows the intact part of a chromosome of one individual in our study. This is an old image now. There's only 189 people here, and we have about 350 people enrolled at this point. And if we had them all, the data from all of them here, it would truly be unreadable. Here's everybody's study number right here. And as I said, each blue bar shows the intact part of the chromosome they have. So this gap here is where their deletion is. And so when you line a lot of these people up, you can start to see a few patterns. The first pattern is that there is one part of the chromosome right here in which nobody has a deletion. Very interesting. There must be a gene in there that if you have only one copy instead of two, that you don't survive to be born. But what that does for us is it creates two groups. One group with deletions in the upper part, the proximal part, proximal being closer to the centromere of 18q. So that's this group of people, and we call that proximal 18q minus. Everyone else who has a deletion including the bottom half of 18q, this is all distal 18q minus. And that's still a huge group, and you can see everybody's breakpoint is different along this image. So we're trying to organize that into additional groups, and one of the things that we have been able to appreciate in the last few years is that one particular gene on 18q has a huge effect on development, and it's called TCF4, and it is right here. If you can see the arrow. So that means all the people in this green box have deletions that include TCF4. This particular person, you can see this blue bar, it doesn't even look like it has a break in it. This particular person has a deletion that includes only TCF4 and no other genes. All these other people up here have either a terminal deletion, like this person, or an interstitial deletion, like this person or these people. And they all have deletions that include TCF4, and so they have what's considered Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, and so that's quite different from the other people with chromosome 18 abnormalities. So we separate out the TCF4 group, and we show that by having TCF4 and then a plus minus, meaning they have one copy and they have a deletion of the other copies. So all these people down here are TCF4++ because they have two copies of TCF4. So also within distal 18q-, we did appreciate that there's a group of individuals, and they're shown here with this green box. We're calling the reference group. And you can see here they all have different breakpoints, but there's a huge gap between a couple of genes. And so even though their breakpoints are technically different, they have exactly the same set of genes that they have one copy of instead of two. So this is as close to a group of people with a uniform molecular basis to their 18q- as we're ever going to get. And so we call that the reference group, for lack of a better term. And you can see about half of the people with distal 18q- without TCF4 deletion have a little bit bigger deletion, and about half have smaller deletions. So we'll be talking here about the reference group. And again, it's just a reference point, kind of a midpoint. We were just lucky that there happened to be a big gap between genes here so that we could create this group. There are a few other gaps, I guess you would say, in which we might be able to say the same two people have exactly the same genes missing, even though they have different breakpoints. But those are groups of one, or groups of two or three people, so they're small groups. And the one thing I did fail to mention about this image is the red are regions of the chromosome that people have a duplication. So that means they don't have just 18q-, they have a little 18q+, or here 18p duplication. These two people have duplications of the entire p arm as well as 18q-. So this is the molecular profile of 18q-. You can see that it is a very heterogeneous group. So keep that in mind as we go through the next slides, that it's very, very heterogeneous. So some of the information. So we have about the skills and the achievements of people with 18q- are in the following slides. So this is proximal 18q-, so that's a small group of people who have the interstitial deletions that are closer to the centromere. And I think this is self-explanatory. It is information about that group. The natural history here, and natural history usually we include information on people over 18 years of age, and you can see it's only 4 individuals over 18. The number of people in each one of these groups or blocks of information may be different because different number of people answer the questionnaire, or different number of people have information in their medical records that we can use. So it's not always the same. But natural history, I think, is self-explanatory about the current, as of June of 2017, their living situation and their educational level. We also have information about behavioral skills. And again, in this group, adults, it's only 2 people. And social impairment in the children are shown here, and adults, and then executive functioning in adults. And I think this is just something you need to read. You can get a copy of the handout. And if you have questions, please ask, but I think it just is one of those things you need to take a few minutes to read carefully. So our management guidelines for people with proximal 18q- are set up just as they are for all the other conditions. The first part of that here is potential conditions in the neonate. So in a newborn, if they happen to have a diagnosis when they're a neonate, these are the things they need to look for. Initial evaluations are those things that need to be looked at when they get a diagnosis. And we don't know when the diagnosis is going to happen, whether it's going to be as a newborn or as a 10-year-old. But we want to make sure that these evaluations are performed in everyone with proximal 18q. And of course, they're going to need referrals, of course, to the Chromosome 18 Clinical Research Center and the Chromosome 18 Registry, but also other subspecialists. And as they grow up, they're going to need to have a long list of things monitored to ensure they have the best health. So here's a guide for those things that need to be monitored. Now, people with distal 18q- with a TCF4 deletion have their data shown here. Again, this is the same as for proximal. It's natural history, behavior information in the adults, information about social impairment and executive function. And again, I think this is self-explanatory, so I won't go over the details of that. One of the things we did find in comparing people who have deletions that include TCF4 and deletions that don't include TCF4 is the developmental range and skills of those groups. And so that's shown here. And again, the TCF4 plus minus are the people who have a deletion that includes TCF4, and the people that are TCF4 plus plus do not. And so this is the reason this is only 9 people, is these are 9 people who have deletions that are terminal deletions of 18q that come right up close to TCF4 but don't include it. So really the difference between these two groups is the difference of TCF4, and that's it. So you can see that dramatically, even though the age ranges are kind of similar, you can see that the group that does not have a TCF4 deletion, they were all verbal, and those that did have a TCF4 deletion were nonverbal. And the IQ of those without a TCF4 deletion is on average 54, but you can see it's a huge range. And the IQs were not really in the measurable range for people with deletions that include TCF4, but their developmental age was on average of a 4-month-old and with a range of 2 to 11. And these were the people enrolled in the study at the time, and so we have additional people enrolled now, so the data is going to change slightly, but not significantly. And let's see, again, we had a paper in 2005, so an old paper. Here's one of the graphs from that paper showing the IQ improvement. So here's a performance IQ is shown here, and here are the ages of the participants. And you'll see this horizontal dotted line right here in black. That's right at 100. So someone who is perfectly typical, doesn't have a chromosome deletion, and is developing absolutely average, their performance IQ would be a flat line right at 100 right here. So this is average performance IQ and average development. It would look like this. So a line sloping down would indicate that the person is not keeping up with their peers developmentally, and so falling farther behind. They're not losing skills, they're just not keeping up with normal development. And lines that go up would be people catching up and developing skills faster than a typical person of their age. So these data are people who are growth hormone treated. The red dotted lines, so if you don't have this in color, you can follow the dotted line, are the growth hormone untreated, and the blue solid lines are the growth hormone treated. And so you can see that those who were treated with growth hormone had an average increase in their performance IQ of 16.8%. IQ points, performance IQ points, which is significant. And this was published in 2005 before we knew the significance of TCF4. And so we were able to go back and relook at that data. And one of the things that we saw that's this is right here at 50 is the cutoff. It's the bottom floor of the test. Below that, the test is not accurate to give a good score. And so that's why these people here have a flat line. We don't know if their scores went from 20 to 50 or 50 to 20 or was 30 and 30 and 30. We don't know because it's below the floor of the test. And so that is these people right here, and it turns out that those are the people who have deletions of TCF4. And like I said, we did not know that about the role of TCF4 at the time, so we did not separate them out. So now we can separate that group out. And when you look at those who had deletions of TCF4, you can see here's their change in their performance IQ, which is not really any change at all. But those who did not have deletions of TCF4, their performance IQ improved 28.3 points. This is a huge difference, and so great improvement for those individuals who were growth hormone deficient and treated with growth hormone. So because the group with TCF4 deletions had scores below the floor of the test and we couldn't really tell what was going on, we took that exact same data but looked at it in a different way. We said, okay, given the skills these individuals do have, what is the typical age someone would acquire those skills? So that's shown in this graph over here. And so we looked at the mental age that they were performing at, and so mental age is here and their chronologic age is here. So someone whose mental age and chronologic age matches, their score would be right here on this diagonal. And so here are the scores of those people who didn't improve or show improvement reinterpreted over here, and you can see that they really didn't acquire any significant amount of skills during the time they were treated with growth hormone. So they were unable to appreciate the same effects, unfortunately. Below that are some other data we've acquired since then, the effect of childhood growth hormone treatment in adults with 18q-. And so the adults with 18q- who were growth hormone deficient and treated with growth hormone since childhood and remained on growth hormone as adults, they all remained growth hormone deficient. They were retested, and they had lower BMI, significantly lower BMI than those who were never treated with growth hormone. They were a little taller, they had better cognitive flexibility, better problem solving, and better frustration control. So they had some behavioral differences as well. So now this information is about the distal 18q- reference group. So just sort of the average group with 18q-. And again, the top graph you can just read is the features that these individuals had. The next graphs need a little bit of explanation, I think. And so we asked about the developmental milestones of this group. And you can see much better on the handout than on the slide here, the age range. And so here's all the skills here. And the age is shown here across the top of each bar. And the typical age at which this skill is acquired is shown in green. And so the average age in the reference group is a black X, but the full range of the ages in which they acquired those skills is shown by a ball-pointed line. So you can see that on average they acquired these skills late, and the older they are develop these skills, the further delayed they are, but they do acquire them. And so so that's important to know what sort of typical age of development is for this group. Also, the IQ of this group is shown in the next graph down here. And we're showing, I like things color-coded. It makes it easier for my brain. So I've interpreted all this data in a color-coded sort of way. Green is considered the average or typical range, not a problematic range at all. Yellow is at risk or a borderline, depending on what the measure is. And red is a problem or severe or profound. So, and again, the X shows the average for the group, and the ball-pointed lines show the whole range of the group. And so with regard to IQ, this little line here is average for the population. So here's an IQ of 100. And you can see the average IQ of this group is below normal, but it's within the normal range. So they have low normal IQs. But again, it's a broad range in this group. Also, below that, interpreted in the same color coding sort of way, are many behavioral measures from different tests. And you'll see on the handout that that numeric scale is shown for each one. And in some of these measures, a good score is a high number, and some of them a good score is a low number. So these are all flipped, so the good scores are all to the left and the problematic scores are to the right, and they're color-coded in the same way. And so you can see for yourself the various behavioral aspects of the reference group with 18Q-. So again, this just takes some time to look at and think about, and me talking about it doesn't really improve your interpretation. Again, here's the management guide set up in exactly the same way for everyone with distal 18Q-. So this is all people with 18Q- regardless, because oftentimes we fear that the treating physicians don't necessarily know if someone has a TCF4 deletion or not. So this is all-inclusive list. First, the things to look for in a neonate, the things you should be sure to do when you have an initial diagnosis, the referrals that need to be made, and then the list of things to monitor and manage as they get older. So here are the information on distal 18Q-. So people with a deletion that does not include TCF4. And again, their natural history, the behavior issues or not issues in adults and in children. And again, I think you can read this through this carefully. And lastly, the age of death. And this is, again, broken out by which category of 18Q- that the individuals have. We think this is really important information for all the families to have. So down here across the bottom, every blue diamond is an individual with 18Q- and their current age. There's about 350 people here, and you can see they tend to be a pretty young group. For the most part, they're under about 40. We don't really have very many older individuals enrolled in the study. So given that, this is the information we have about those who have died. Only one child has died with proximal 18Q-, and this shows their age. That is 8% of the whole population with proximal 18Q-. We separated out those people who have complex rearrangements. So those people who also have a duplication or deletion, but usually a duplication of another chromosome or another part of a chromosome. So they don't have just 18Q-, they have 18Q- and 3P+ or something, or even 18Q- and 18P+. In that group that are more complex genetically, 32% have passed away. And in the group with TCF4 deletions, this group, 35% have passed away. And on the next slide, you'll see the cause of death of most of those individuals. So that is the group that we're most concerned about, medically speaking. And those that have distal 18q- who do not have deletions that include TCF4, only 5% of those have died, and so that's a very healthy group. And you can see the age, it's a scattering of ages. So for the most part, these are not medically fragile individuals. And the majority of them so far are alive and well, we're happy to say. And the information we have in each group about the cause of death is shown here and shown on this slide, so you're going to need the handout to look at this. But we think this is really important information for families to have, to give you a heads up of what potential problems they might encounter. We don't have enough, luckily don't have enough individuals who have died to know any trends. So we are giving you the individual data that we have. And as I said, if you have questions or you need a hard copy so you can read along with this, contact Annis Hill. She's a project manager, and she will make sure you get a PDF of this handout, or if you have a question, she will send the question on to whoever can answer that for you and bug them until they answer you. So she's the go-to person, and I thank you for your attention. And let us know what else we can do to help. Thanks.